There are some truths that change you forever, not because they're complicated or profound, but because the moment you hear them, something inside you shifts, irreversibly. You can't unknow them. You can't unsee what's been revealed, and you certainly can't go back to who you were before. I learned one of those truths on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Nothing about that day suggested it would be the day everything I thought I knew would shatter. No dramatic signs, no spiritual warnings, just silence. And then, in that silence, a voice, not audible but undeniable, spoke words that were never meant for human ears. Here's what they don't tell you about being a chosen one. Some knowledge is protected. Some revelations are guarded. Some truths are kept behind spiritual veils, specifically because they would disrupt the entire system if they were widely known. And when you accidentally or divinely stumble upon one of those truths, everything changes. The angels don't celebrate. The universe doesn't congratulate you. Instead, there's this profound, uncomfortable realization. You now carry information that makes you dangerous. Not to people, not to the world, but to the forces that depend on humanity remaining spiritually unconscious. I'm about to share that truth with you, not because I want to, but because if you're watching this right now, you're ready for it. Or more accurately, you've been prepared for it, whether you realize it or not. The fact that you clicked on this video, the fact that these words are reaching your eyes right now, is not coincidence. It's confirmation. But before I reveal what I learned that day, I need you to understand something. Once you hear this, there's no going back. You won't be able to live in comfortable ignorance anymore. You won't be able to pretend you don't know. And certain forces, both human and non-human, will sense that you carry this knowledge. So I'm going to ask you right now, are you sure you want to know? Are you prepared for the weight of truth that was never meant to reach chosen ones until they were fully awakened? Because what I'm about to tell you will either liberate you completely or burden you with a responsibility you didn't ask for. If you're still here, if something inside you is saying, I need to hear this, then you've already made your choice. Let me take you back to that Tuesday. Let me tell you exactly what happened. And let me reveal the truth that changed everything. It started like a day that didn't deserve a place in your memory. No thunder in the sky, no strange dreams the night before, no dramatic signs announcing that your entire reality was about to crack open. Just the same routine, the same thoughts, the same quiet ache in your spirit that you had learned to carry in silence. The kind of day you move through on autopilot, never suspecting that heaven and hell are both watching closely, waiting to see what you'll do next. But beneath the surface of that ordinary day, something had been set in motion long before you woke up. A conversation in the spiritual realm that you were not invited to. A decision made about your life without your consent. As a chosen one, your name had been spoken in places your feet had never stood, and your destiny had been discussed by beings you had never seen. There were plans for your life, plans for your mind, plans for your gifts, and almost none of them were meant to be revealed to you. You could feel it even if you couldn't explain it, the strange resistance every time you tried to elevate, the invisible wall that appeared right when you got close to a breakthrough. The way people around you seemed triggered by your very existence, as if your presence exposed something they were trying to hide. You told yourself it was all in your head. You blamed bad luck, bad timing, or bad decisions, but deep inside, something whispered, there's more going on than you're being told. That day, the whisper turned into a spiritual scream. It didn't happen in a church or during a ritual. It happened in a moment that looked painfully normal. Maybe you overheard a conversation that was never meant for your ears. Maybe you read a message that was supposed to be deleted. Maybe you suddenly remembered something, an old dream, a strange childhood moment, a pattern that finally clicked into place. Or maybe it came as a download, a spiritual revelation that hit your spirit so hard it almost knocked the breath out of your body. Whatever it was, it felt like time paused. You felt your spirit step forward before your body could react. Your heart beat differently, heavier, like it knew something ancient had just resurfaced. The atmosphere shifted. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were suddenly listening. And then you realized you had just accessed a truth that wasn't meant to be in your hands. It wasn't just information, it was exposure. Exposure of who you really are, exposure of what they've really been doing, exposure of why your life has never felt normal, no matter how hard you tried to force yourself into normalcy. You didn't just learn that you're different, you learned that you were made to be different, and that there were systems, spiritual and human, specifically designed to keep you from ever understanding why. You weren't just dealing with random obstacles, you were dealing with intentional opposition. Every delay, every betrayal, every attack on your mental health, every season where you felt buried and forgotten, it all suddenly formed a pattern. And that's when the weight of it hit you. You were never meant to hear this truth because the moment you did, you became dangerous. Dangerous to manipulation, dangerous to spiritual control, dangerous to the darkness that feeds off ignorance. Because now you knew. You knew that the reason you never quite fit in wasn't rejection. It was protection. You knew that the isolation you hated was actually training ground. You knew that the spiritual attacks on your mind, your body, your relationships were never random. They were strategic attempts to break a vessel that heaven intends to use. And as soon as that truth settled in your spirit, something else happened, something subtle but unmistakable. You felt watched, not in a paranoid way, but in a spiritual way. Like forces that had comfortably moved in the shadows of your life suddenly realized you could see them now, that you could trace their fingerprints on moments you once called bad luck, that you could identify their interference in doors that mysteriously closed, friendships that suddenly turned, opportunities that fell apart right at the edge of breakthrough. You weren't supposed to connect those dots. You weren't supposed to remember. You weren't supposed to wake up at this level. But you did. And once you did, they couldn't unawaken you. That's why after that moment things shifted even more. Some people around you started acting strange, as if your spirit was now speaking a language they couldn't handle. Some relationships felt like costumes being ripped off, true intentions suddenly visible. Environments you used to tolerate began to feel unbearable. Your soul developed a low tolerance for fake, for spiritual laziness, for anything that dimmed your light. You weren't becoming too sensitive. You were finally seeing clearly. The truth you heard that day didn't just inform you, it marked you. It drew a line in the sand between who you used to be and who you could never again pretend to be. It forced you into a new level of responsibility, because once a chosen one sees what was never meant to be seen, there are only two options: numb yourself and pretend you don't know, or rise into the version of yourself that truth demands. And deep down, you know which option is really available to you, because if you were meant to stay asleep, you wouldn't be here right now, listening to this. Out of all the videos you could have watched, out of all the voices you could have heard, you're here, with a title like this in front of you for a reason. Your spirit recognizes this frequency. It recognizes this story, not because it's new, but because it sounds like your own. In the next part of this message, the layers of that truth will be peeled back. What you overheard, what you saw, what you felt that day, it wasn't an accident. It was a divine breach of a system that was never meant to control you in the first place. And once you see what's really behind the curtain, you will never see your life or your calling the same way again. You thought you were just connecting dots in your own life. You didn't realize you were stepping into information that had been carefully hidden from you your entire existence. The first thing that hit you after that moment wasn't clarity. It was confusion. Your mind tried to reject what your spirit already knew. You told yourself, no, that can't be it. I'm overthinking. I'm being dramatic. Because the truth you had just touched was too big, too precise, too exposing to be coincidence. It didn't just explain one situation, it explained almost everything. Little memories started to resurface like puzzle pieces that had been waiting years for you to finally look at them correctly. The teachers who singled you out, not because you were bad, but because you were bright in a way they couldn't control. The relatives who treated you like a threat the moment you stopped shrinking yourself. The sudden distance from people who once swore they loved you right after you began to step into your authenticity. At the time, it felt personal. It felt like rejection, abandonment, jealousy. But this new truth whispered something completely different. They weren't reacting to you, they were reacting to what you carry. That was the first layer of the truth you were never meant to hear. You are not too much. You are not the problem. Your presence exposes what others are trying to hide, from themselves, from God, from the world. But there was a second layer, one that made your chest feel tight the moment it clicked. You realized that your life had not been randomly difficult. Your battles were not just about bad luck, bad choices, or bad timing. There had been strategy behind your suffering. Every time you got close to peace, something exploded. Every time you stepped toward purpose, someone betrayed you. Every time your heart healed enough to trust again, another wound appeared in the same place, and then it hit you. Somebody has been afraid of who I would become if I ever healed fully. That was the truth. The one you were never meant to hear. The one you stumbled into on that ordinary day. You weren't supposed to realize that certain people benefited from your brokenness. That some environments needed you insecure to keep you controllable. That there were spiritual forces intentionally engineering cycles around you. Not to destroy you outright, but to keep you looping, exhausted and distracted. Because a chosen one who's completely broken is tragic. But a chosen one who is half functioning, half awake, half healed, that's useful to the wrong side. You began to see it everywhere. You noticed how the moments that wounded you the most all had one thing in common. They happened at key turning points, right before a new opportunity. Right after you made a decision to grow. Right when you told yourself things are finally getting better. That's when the sabotage always hit. And suddenly, what you overheard, what you sensed, what you saw that day made sense. Maybe you heard someone admit they never believed in you, but still wanted to keep you close. Maybe you found out a person you trusted had been speaking against you while smiling in your face. Maybe you realized systems, family, religious, social, professional, were never built with someone like you in mind. They were built to keep someone like you contained. You realized there was a script already written for your life. A quiet, invisible script that said, keep them doubting themselves. Keep them apologizing for their power. Keep them busy fixing everyone else so they never have time to rise. Keep them spiritually confused just enough to never see the full picture. You were never meant to know that script existed. You were supposed to internalize it and call it personality or fate. But that day, the script slipped. You saw it, you heard it, you felt it, and something in you snapped. Not in a destructive way, but in a liberating one. Because once you understand that your suffering was strategic, you also understand something even more powerful. If there has been this much effort to keep you small, then your full size in the spirit must be terrifying. You don't put this much surveillance on someone who doesn't matter. You don't invest this much energy into confusing, delaying, and attacking someone whose destiny is irrelevant. So you sat with that truth. Maybe you cried, maybe you shook, maybe you felt anger rise, anger at the lies, at the manipulation, at the years you spent thinking you were the problem. But beneath the anger was something else, relief. Because for the first time, your life made sense. The weight, the warfare, the patterns, the losses, it wasn't all chaos, it was confirmation. Confirmation that you were marked. Confirmation that you were noticed long before you ever knew your own name in the spirit. Confirmation that heaven and hell both agreed on one thing. If this one ever wakes up, everything changes. That's why you were never meant to hear this truth. Because once you did, the game could never be played the same way again. You started to see the tools that had been used against you. Guilt, obligation, gaslighting, spiritual fear, shame, false humility. You saw how every time you got close to choosing yourself, someone made you feel selfish. How every time you thought about leaving certain environments, someone pulled out your loyalty. How every time you set a boundary, you were painted as the villain. But now, with this truth in your hands, those tactics stopped working the same way. The strings were still being pulled, but you could see them now, and a chosen one who can see the strings is one step away from cutting them. That's the danger. That's why you were never meant to hear what you heard, see what you saw, know what you now know. Because the moment a chosen one stops blaming themselves and starts recognizing the pattern, something shifts in the spiritual realm. Victim energy falls off. Agreement with old lies breaks. Spiritual contracts built on your ignorance start to burn, and you become what you were always meant to be. Not a pawn, not a target, but a problem. For every force that counted on you staying asleep. In the next part, it doesn't just stay as knowledge. Because once you know the truth, the question becomes, what are you going to do with it? Some truths wake you up. This one demands that you decide who you're going to be now that you're awake. Some truths wake you up. This one demands that you decide who you're going to be now that you're awake. Block 3. Becoming the version of you they feared. Once the shock of what you discovered began to settle, you reached a crossroads that every chosen one eventually faces, whether they realize it or not. On one side was the life you had been living up until that moment, familiar, predictable, suffocating. On the other side was something unknown, uncomfortable, and dangerous to everything that had fed on your confusion, your fully awakened self. You realized something crucial. The truth you heard wasn't just information, it was an invitation to step out of the role they wrote for you and into the role you were designed for. But here's the part no one tells you. The moment you accept that invitation, resistance increases. Suddenly, the thoughts get louder. Maybe you're imagining this. Maybe you're being dramatic. Who do you think you are to break cycles that existed long before you? Those aren't just random doubts. Those are the last attempts of an old system trying to pull you back into agreement. Because as long as you agree to be small, the script still works. The moment you disagree, even silently in your spirit, the whole structure starts to tremble. So you did something subtle, but spiritually massive. You whispered, even if only to yourself, "No, I'm not crazy, I'm not overreacting, I see it now." That was your first act of rebellion, not against people, not against God, but against the lie that your discernment could not be trusted. From there, the changes didn't all happen at once. They began in tiny, almost invisible ways. You stopped explaining yourself so much. You stopped oversharing your revelations with people who only used your vulnerability as ammunition. You stopped seeking validation from those who were secretly invested in you staying confused. You started listening to that quiet inner pull, the one that had been there your whole life, but had always been talked over, doubted or shamed. You noticed how your spirit felt heavy in certain conversations, certain rooms, certain atmospheres. You noticed how your body tensed around people who smiled at you with their mouth but not their eyes. Before, you would have ignored that. Now you treated it like data, evidence, confirmation. You began changing simple things first, saying no when your whole being screamed no, even if your voice trembled. Taking your time to answer instead of immediately agreeing to what drained you. allowing silence instead of rushing to fill every gap with explanations and apologies. And with every small act of alignment, you felt something return to you that you hadn't even realized you lost. Your power. Not the loud, ego-driven kind. The quiet, stable kind. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be undeniable. You started realizing that not everyone deserved front-row access to you. Your energy was no longer a free resource. Your empathy was no longer an open faucet for anyone to drink from whenever they were thirsty, but never there when you were empty. This is what they were afraid of. Not you being mean, not you being cold, but you being clear. Clear about who you are, clear about what you carry. Clear about what you will and will not tolerate, because a clear chosen one is efficient, and an efficient chosen one is dangerous to every system built on confusion, guilt, and fear. Then came the deeper shift. You stopped asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and started asking, "What does this unlock in me?" If your life had been strategically opposed, then clearly your existence is strategically important. If forces worked this hard to keep you from knowing the truth, then your awakened state must carry consequences in the spirit. You began to see your story differently. Those seasons where you were isolated, training. Those betrayals that broke your heart. Exposure, not punishment. Those dark nights where you almost gave up. Evidence that something on the other side of your survival terrified the enemy. You started to understand. Your calling isn't just about what you do, it's about what you carry. You carry clarity in a world built on illusions. You carry courage in a system that runs on fear. You carry truth in spaces that worship comfort and performance. And that's why you were never meant to hear what you now know, because once a chosen one recognizes their own value, they stop selling themselves at the discount rates others placed on them. From that moment on, your choices began to align with your revelation. You began protecting your time like a sacred resource. You began guarding your atmosphere, music, conversations, media, environments. You began honoring your intuition instead of gaslighting yourself. And yes, some people didn't like this version of you, the version that no longer immediately says yes, the version that takes space instead of always holding it for others, the version that can see straight through manipulation and simply doesn't play along. But that's how you knew you were stepping into the version of yourself they feared. Because the ones who truly carry love for you adjusted. They respected your boundaries. They honored your growth. They didn't try to guilt trip you back into old versions of yourself. The others? They fell away, exposed by the very truth you were never meant to hear. And as painful as it was, you understood. Anyone who cannot stand beside you in truth was never safe to walk with you in purpose. You didn't become heartless. You became aligned. Aligned with the fact that your life is not an accident, aligned with the reality that your battles were never random, aligned with the knowing that your very existence disrupts patterns that have gone unchecked for generations. And once you stepped into that alignment, another truth quietly emerged, one far more comforting than anything you lost. You were never outnumbered. You were never unprotected. You were never walking alone. The same divine source that allowed you to overhear, see, or sense what you were never meant to know, did it because it was time. Time for the script to be broken. Time for the pattern to be interrupted. Time for the chosen one in the bloodline to stop agreeing with stories that were never written for them. And now that you've heard this truth, now that you've felt it, now that it's rearranged something inside of you, there's only one question left. Not why me, not what if I'm wrong, but what am I going to build now that I refuse to be controlled? In the next part, that's where this goes, from realization to responsibility, to the kind of transformation that doesn't just change you, it changes everyone connected to you. This is the part where your story stops being a secret battle and starts becoming a public assignment. not for everyone to approve, but for those who were always meant to be impacted by your awakening. At some point, the realization settles in. This truth was never just about you understanding your past. It was about you stepping into authority over your future. The moment you saw the invisible script, you were given the power to rewrite it, not only for yourself, but for everyone spiritually tied to your obedience. You started to notice something powerful. Every time you chose alignment over people-pleasing, the atmosphere around you shifted. Old cycles loosened their grip. Patterns that ran through your family line began to stutter and break. It wasn't loud. There were no fireworks, but you could feel it. Like spiritual chains being quietly cut every time you refused to shrink back into the version of yourself that made everyone else comfortable. You realized that your healing was not selfish, it was prophetic. Every boundary you set was not just a personal decision, it was a declaration in the spirit. Dysfunction stops here. Emotional manipulation stops here. Silence and pretending stop here. You started to understand why the warfare had been so intense around your life. You were never just the black sheep. You were the breaker, the one assigned to confront what everyone before you had learned to tolerate, the one who would rather face temporary loneliness than live a lifetime out of alignment with truth. And slowly, almost without realizing it, you began to move differently. You spoke more carefully, with intention, knowing your words carry weight. You started praying not from a place of begging, but from a place of partnership. You stopped asking, "Will they like me?" and started asking, "Does this honor the assignment on my life?" That's when another layer of the truth emerged, one that softened the anger and deepened the clarity. Not everyone who hurt you knew what they were doing. Some were just repeating scripts handed to them. Some were weapons in the wrong hands, not realizing they were being used. It didn't excuse what they did, but it freed you from carrying them as your identity. You were never what they did to you. You were always what you were chosen to do through it. And that's when the shift happened from, "Why did they target me?" to, "What am I now responsible for?" Because now, you see through religious control, through emotional games, through spiritual guilt tripping. You see the difference between conviction and condemnation, guidance and control, divine delay and manufactured blockage. You see that what you survived wasn't meant to break you. It was meant to build a version of you hell doesn't know what to do with. A version of you that can walk into a room and discern the atmosphere within seconds. A version of you that can hear between words, feel between actions, and sense when someone's smile hides an agenda. A version of you that can no longer be easily manipulated because you finally recognize the patterns. That is why you were never meant to hear this truth. Because once you become this version of yourself, you're no longer just surviving attacks, you're dismantling systems. You become a walking interruption. An interruption to generational curses, an interruption to cycles of silence, an interruption to spiritual setups that once moved unchecked. And here's the part that should give you both humility and holy confidence. You are not the first chosen one in history, but you may be the first in your bloodline to say, "It ends with me." Not the calling, not the spirituality, but the ignorance, the agreement, the blind submission to what never came from God in the first place. You're not just waking up for you, you're waking up for every ancestor who never had the language, the courage, or the opportunity to do what you're doing right now. You're waking up for every child, every soul, every person attached to your obedience who will never even know how hard this battle was for you. And that is why, after all of this, you cannot go back to pretending you don't see. You cannot go back to calling yourself crazy when your discernment is sharp. You cannot go back to environments that suffocate your spirit and then call it humility. You cannot go back to playing small so others don't feel confronted by what's on your life. You heard a truth you were never meant to hear. You saw what you were never supposed to see, and now, whether you like it or not, you carry a responsibility that matches the weight of your revelation. The darkness around you already knows this. The real question is, what are you going to do with what you now know? If this message has been pulling on something deep inside you, that's not just emotion, that's confirmation. You are not hearing this by accident, and you are not the only one going through this. On this channel, Marked and Chosen, every video is created for people exactly like you, those who have seen too much, felt too much, survived too much to ever go back to sleep. Here, your experiences aren't dismissed, your sensitivity isn't mocked, and your calling isn't minimized. This is your spiritual war room, your training ground, your reminder that you're not crazy. You're chosen. So here's what to do next. Subscribe to Marked and Chosen and turn on all notifications so you don't miss the messages that are being released specifically for your journey. Drop a comment and tell your story. What truth did you realize you were never supposed to hear, and how did it change you? Your testimony might be the lifeline another chosen one needs right now. Share this video with someone who feels like they're waking up to something they can't explain. You might be the divine confirmation they've been praying for. You didn't come this far just to go back to pretending. You are marked. You are chosen. You are dangerous to the darkness because you carry a truth you were never meant to hear, and you survived it. Now it's time to learn how to walk in it, stay connected, stay protected, and meet back here on Marked and Chosen for your next assignment.